Three women, three generations, three books, two countries, one cult. This is the cult on the Cape. And here with me today again is Carrie Buddington, Beth Granger, and Sarah Patrick. I'm Bonnie Zampino, your host, and we are here talking about life at the Community of Jesus and Grenville Christian College. So today, as we begin to explore and talk about what life was like day in and day out at these two cults that were all tied into one, I wanted to start with a clip of one of Mother Kay and Mother Judy's teaching tapes. This one is entitled, I Repent of Me. And we'll share this and then talk about what we think about that.
We don't call promiscuity today whoredom. I don't care what we call it. That's what it is. Whoredom. Today we have a generation of whores. And some of them are your sons and daughters. Are the friends of your sons and daughters.
Well, whores, what do you have to say
That's
for
really strong.
yourselves?
Wow.
Ay, ay, ay.
Ay, 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 ay,
How
ay.
does that feel listening to that? What does it bring
Awful.
back?
Awful. Oh,
It
The
brings back that
shame.
cringy, that shame, that cringy feeling. You wake up in the morning and I didn't think of it in those words exactly, but where am I going to be a whore today? Where am I going to be so long today?
Just drowning in shame. Like, they really made us feel like that we were like streetwalkers. Like I mean, honestly, as early as 7 years old, I was in a light session being accused of my lust, because I had seen a man naked who was mowing a lawn. I saw him from the back and I didn't tell. And I was 7 and I was with another little girl and we decided we weren't going to tell because we were so embarrassed. And that landed me in a huge light session where I was just stripped down for my lust. I must have been secretly lusting after him. Why else wouldn't I have confessed? And you just felt so like disgusting and dirty as a female all those years. And I didn't leave till I was, well, anyway, I don't want to get into that, but yeah. And then as a teenager, I got in so much trouble for having a crush on a boy that I didn't confess about my crush, and they just made me feel like I was like a whore. Yeah. And we didn't even hold hands. Like it was just ridiculous, but I felt so dirty. Yeah. Anyway.
as a student, because of that kind of talk, which we got as students,
Yeah.
I felt incapable of being friends with boys. The whole thing scared me so much
Yeah.
that I didn't know how to talk to them. I didn't know how to just be myself because I was afraid I would be I'd be a whore, or it just created a fear of men, or of boys, that really plagued me all my life. That I couldn't just be in a normal relation, not even a friendship. Friendship was really hard because it was always tainted with the possibility that if you not, if you say something a certain way, if you wear something a certain way, you're going to be in bed with the guy, and then of course all hell would break loose, right? So there was just a lot of fear around relationships and just normal, I'm just talking normal relationships. As far as sexual or romantic relationships, that I was so afraid about I had no relationship with any boy while I was there. I was just too afraid.
Yeah.
So as as adults, you all became, I mean, Carrie, you came in kind of as an adult, but Beth and Sarah, you were staff. Um, how did you look at the students, or Carrie, how did you look at the young people in the community based on these teachings?
Mhm.
I never saw our young people as whores or sluts or any of these other derogatory terms. And I always thought that it was crazy that they couldn't even talk to each other without being chaperoned. I always thought that was too severe. I remember that teaching that night. My kids were really little. That was in the early years, and my kids were really little. So I, in my mind, it didn't apply to my kids. And I remember feeling really sorry for the other parents in the room who did have teenage um, aged children, and how awful that must be for them to hear that and to have to deal with that. And I felt like I dodged that bullet. And when my kids were growing up, I never thought my oldest daughter, she did her teenage years there. She was one of the last graduating classes from Nauset High School. After that, they started the homeschooling, I think, some. Um, I never thought of her in those terms, but then they also had her leave home and live over in one of the houses, the Ark, with a bunch of the other teenage girls under Susie's supervision to train them up to be servants, really, but proper
Mhm.
young ladies. And so she probably got a lot of pressure as far as boys were concerned at that time. But I wasn't a part of that. I wasn't aware of it.
Hmm.
Well, this is an odd a memory, but um, growing up, when I got to the age of well, grade 13, that whole year, I was in training, like intensive training to be staff member. And so I was basically expected to act like a staff member and run the floor that I was in the dorm. And I remember just graduation, you know, I barely made it to graduation banquet where I was supposed to be, one of the graduates dressed up and, processing in because I spent the whole day on my sewing machine fixing dresses for girls whose dresses had been like whose gowns had been deemed inappropriate and they knew I could sew. So here I was like
Oh my God.
by like trying to figure out how to adjust all these dresses just in the nick of time so these poor girls could wear these gowns that their parents had bought for them, adding, shoulders where there weren't shoulders or extending sleeves or what have you. And I barely got into mine on time to get to the graduation banquet, but that's just dumb. It's a dumb memory, but there was so much pressure for every girl to be perfectly dressed and so modest and
Yeah.
you felt so inspected and violated, the way we would have to like as staff members I didn't do this, but some staff members would feel their backs to make sure they were wearing a slip and a bra on the way out to of the dorm. Or we were supposed to watch every single girl as she went out, on Saturday and Sunday to make sure they're dressed exactly appropriately, and if they didn't, we were in trouble. So
Mhm.
I took part in that, I don't remember being nasty to girls, but that was the expectation. But yeah, it just, the kinds of humiliation that we had to take part in. Anyway, it's just all the clothing restrictions were just one thing, but and even the how we would have those dorm inspections, dorm searches while the
Mhm.
girls didn't know their clothing was being completely ruffled through, and we're looking at their underwear and looking for anything that was what's the word, contraband, just so
Mhm.
such a violation of privacy, reading people's letters that were locked, all that stuff. It's just gross. And anyway, yeah.
I can I chime in?
Yeah.
So that reminds me when you said the thing about stuff, like I don't remember doing it myself, but maybe I did, who knows? But that running your fingers down the back, so that Father Farnsworth, or Charles Farnsworth taught us how to do that because when I
Wow.
was a student, there was a lot of light sessions around promiscuity, and they were always involving people mimicking other people's persona. Like I write in my book about how we were called to a light session and I was outside the door waiting to go in, and Charles Farnsworth came up behind me and he snapped my bra in my, like, just snapped it in the back, and he said, "You're not wearing a camisole." and
Oh,
and uh, and then I go into the meeting, and it was, I mean, it was other people too, but I was singled out, and they did things like there'd be like prefects at the front. I think at that time it was prefects, but other students would mimic you and how you walk and how you, like, so my persona was walked down the aisle like I have a seductive walk,
yes.
and so wow, when you said that about running your finger, that's what happened to me. He did that to
Mm,
me. And I don't know how I
it's
responded. I
crazy.
can't even imagine how I'd respond to that. Like shock, obviously,
Yeah.
but it's so, oh my God, oh God.
Yeah, the seductive walk, and that was done to so many people,
Yeah.
including like staff members. I remember being a little kid listening and thinking, what does that mean? Like, to be what does seductive mean? And then a woman was told she had a seductive voice
Yeah.
on the doing the announcements, or, on the PA, like,
Yeah. One other story is
Yeah.
that I was being put on discipline again for something, and a staff member, I won't say who, came to me and was crying and said, "You need to change. Please just give in, just change." She said, and then she went into her own story about her own, what a Jezebel she was, and how all this talk, that this Grenville talk about being a whore about herself, and I'm
mm,
like a student and my eyes are like, I couldn't even believe it, so they were getting it too, and this person was terrified for me
mm.
that I was bucking it and that I was trying to, she was like pleading for me, but it was almost like she was pleading for herself. It was just bizarre.
Oh, the indoctrination, it's just gross.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
can remember a session where they had all of us community women come down to Bethany, and then they had some teenage girls come in and made them lift up their skirts and show us the underwear that they were wearing, because some of them were wearing low-cut underwear. Total
Mhm.
shaming. Total.
Oh God,
Yep.
that's awful.
I
And they
also
would,
remember, I'm sorry, go.
well, and they would teach us community women. In the early years, for a couple decades, we couldn't wear pants.
Mhm.
Only if you were out picking berries or, weeding the garden. You could wear pants for that. Otherwise, you could not wear pants. And if you did wear pants, your shirt had to be long enough to be below your buttocks. Otherwise, you were going to be a temptation to the men. I can even remember at the time. I was like, yeah, I'll do it, but it was stupid.
Remember the
But
bathing
see, I
suit?
came into the community as a married woman, so I wasn't subjected to as much of that as the young people were. Because I mean, I wasn't interested in other men. Um, but oddly enough, I had an easier time being friendly with men than with women. I was always suspicious of the other women because we ratted on each other. You couldn't trust each other. Um, but like in band, I got along very well with my male band members. And if I had any friends, was a couple of the men, but not in a sexual way, but just in feeling comfortable with them.
So I'm glad you brought up band, and we brought up a few other parts of daily life, but I think it's important to kind of talk about what it was like, day in and day out with, all of these other psychological things that are being done, to break your spirit and break you down. Um, but yeah, so Carrie, can we start with you when your years um
Yeah,
there?
band turned out to be a big disappointment to me because music, well, my mother taught me to play the piano, and then in school I played a little bit of violin. So when we got to the community, um, I actually started out, they started up a little orchestra. The first band was from Kay's, I don't know, some birthday, 60th, 70th, some big 65th, some big birthday. And people just kind of pulled instruments out of their attics and put a ribbon on the goat and had a little parade. I have a picture of it actually somewhere. Um, but they kept getting together to play, and then the Macmillans joined, and Alan was a great violin teacher, and so started up a little orchestra. So I actually started in orchestra, but he didn't give us regular lessons, and after about a year of that, I got tired of playing out of tune, and the band had started by then, and they were marching in the local town, Orleans parades, and I would get choked up. And I don't really know why. I don't know if it was the fact that they were a cohesive unit, doing something together. I'm not sure, but I wanted to be part of the band, so I asked if I could join the band, and they said, "Yeah, start in the percussion." So I went back to the percussion, and they put me on the bass drum, and I loved it. It was fun. So I stayed in the percussion the whole time that I was in band, and went from the bass drum to the tenor drum to the snare drum, and then once they started doing the field shows, I switched over to the pit, which was all the keyboard instruments as well as the cymbals and drums and stuff. Um, Music meant a lot to me. It fed my soul. It gave me a sense of freedom and happiness. And I can remember in the later years when band was so miserable, when we were actually playing the show, um, I wasn't aware of my body hurting, and I wasn't aware of my depression. And the minute the last note would be played, all of that would descend on me again. My feet were aching, my back was aching, I was depressed, and thinking like, well, what is this all for anyway? But when I was playing either the violin or the percussion, um, I was transported out of my misery. And I remember after one band show, a lady came down out of the stands and said to me, "Oh, it's such a joy watching you play. You're so happy." And I was 100% shocked. Like, happy? uh, because I was anything but happy. But that was just evidence that while I was playing, I was transported to a different place. So it was really devastating to me when they started getting really hard on us in both band and orchestra. Because um, for a while, I was doing both. I became section leader of the second violins in orchestra for a while. Um, I think that was after I retired from band. But yeah, Rick went on this Rick had been in the military, and so he came home and he was all fired up to make the band into a military band. And we had to buy these blue wool uniforms, and he started doing boot camps, military style boot camps with rolling in the snow and the mud and climbing up slippery, muddy hills, helping each other to the top and running and push-ups. And I got plenty of stories, but I'll give Beth and Sarah a chance to talk.
And you're, just to clarify, you're talking about Rick Pugsley Jr., yes?
Yes.
Yeah. So what other, music was a big part of at least the community of Jesus, and I think also at Grenville. But what would be a day in the life for you, Beth or Sarah? You wake up in the morning. Let's. It doesn't matter, if you want to talk about when you were a child, a student, or whether when you were an adult or a staff, but talk about a typical day.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to, before I do that, it just occurred to me, like, it was like what Carrie was talking about with band, the performance aspect of our lives, it was so, I think, like, because we were always performing, it, I mean, that's just like, I don't know how to say this, but because it was like we're putting out this product, of this shiny, happy life, this we're excellence to the glory of God. And as long as you bought into the goal of becoming, like, attaining that performance excellence, you didn't think about all the shit that was happening, all the late sessions, all the other stuff, because you could focus on becoming excellent in whatever fields or whatever performing you got to do. So if you were in music, like, I think that actually was one of the music or drama. It kind of helped me, uh, I don't know, dissociate from all the other crap that was happening.
Yes. Yeah.
And I still love it. Like, I still actually sing in a concert choir because of that experience was the only good experience for me with the performing. But it also, um, like I said, it sort of helped us, I don't know, shielded us from all the other shit. Like, if you were ever on a discipline, the first thing you would lose was the chance to be in band, orchestra, choir, whatever. That was pulled
Hmm.
from you because that was the one thing that we got to do that did feed our souls or made us feel good. But anyway, as far as to answer your question, I'll just, in a nutshell, say that those 3 decades at Grenville was just non-stop, you know, non-stop, being scheduled every minute, being required to be, um, yeah, being scheduled every minute. Everything you did was, like, you didn't dare be late. Never had free time. If you ever had free, like, each day we had to, as a staff member, we had to like carve out free time so that we could go to prayer vigil, you know, and we had to, attendance was taken. So I remember, like, you'd feel terrible if you missed that day of prayer vigil for whatever reason. And that was a half an hour where you'd have to go and pray. But then, even once, the whole, we're constantly working from 6, I guess we got up at 6 or 6:30 in the morning. And then even as a student, you didn't go to bed till usually 11 or 12 if, you're trying to do well on all your studies. And there was no free time, no downtime. And then as a staff member, we also had to fit in chant services. So, there you were not, we never watched TV or, um, even days off. You never knew if you'd actually get your scheduled half day off or full day off. And even if you did, you needed to be ready to pivot on a moment's notice because, there were often things scheduled, like, you'd plan to do something and oops, there's a staff meeting being called or whatever. So like, yeah, I just remember feeling like on a fast paced treadmill. And then, yeah, I don't know, that's just it, a summary. Like, I can tell you the days, but I don't know if we want to go into that kind of detail. But yeah.
I'll
Sarah,
tell you a day. I'll tell you a day.
Okay.
As a staff, I'd get up. I'd have to supervise the girls in the dorm, making their beds. I'd go to the dining room and I'd sit with the students through breakfast. Then I'd go with the students to chapel. And then I would go to the dorm and get my stuff for the day, and I'd go to teach until lunch. And then I would have to do supervision sometimes after lunch for a half an hour. Then I'd teach for the rest of the afternoon, and then I'd go to play practice and direct the play until dinner, and then sit with the students during dinner. All meals were with the students, so there's no downtime, no alone time, and then have dinner, and then there was supervision. So
Yep.
there'd be an hour of supervision, which you had to patrol like a policeman and watch for infractions, and then supervising supervising, what do you call it?
Study hall.
Study hall, 2 hours.
Hmm.
And then sometimes you supervised late lights, which was the late study times. And then there was a point in time, I mean, there was a point in time that we had to do what they called night watch,
Hmm.
which is women were scheduled to go and patrol, hourly on around the school, make sure nobody was up to, hanky panky. And then also some single women who were like the workhorses of the community would have to answer phones, be on a schedule of answering phones overnight. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
I remember. So it was exactly as Beth said. It was just back to back to back to back. I remember when we got a day off. When I first came back as a staff, I don't think we had any days off.
No.
But then they said somebody like outside of the school said you got to give them a day off. I think it was what's her name from Prescott, the
Diana Poisson.
no, the politician, whatever her name was,
Oh,
um, Wads.
yeah, Jean Castleman Watts.
Said you have to give a day off. So we got a day off. And the way I experienced that day off was that I completely had meltdowns. Like I was so depressed. I just didn't know what to do with myself. I just could not function. And I remember Charles calling me and saying, he'd check in, how's your day off going? And I would tell him my sad story. I'd probably be crying or something I was just depressed. And he said, you need to go into the dorm and look after those girls. And so off I'd go again
Yeah.
because it was the fallout of all the week of just, and I just couldn't handle the inactivity. I couldn't handle it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
what time would your day begin and what time would it end?
Well,
What time? Six,
uh,
6.
we had to get the kids up at 6:30, so we had to be up before then.
Yeah.
And when you say like watching them make their beds, it was more than that. We had to make sure all the kids cleaned their rooms, did their dorm duties. Like they had to wash the stairs and wash the hallways and the bathrooms. And it was up to us to make them do that
Yeah.
and then get them to breakfast on time in their perfect student uniforms.
They did that
And
every day.
every day.
They
And we had to inspect their rooms while they were eating breakfast. So
Yeah.
we didn't have a chance to breathe either. Like we
We
were
had to
barely
grade
got to
their
breakfast.
grade their rooms.
Yes, everyone got a mark for their rooms and their chores every day. So,
so you
and
would get
then
them up
you
at
put
6:30 to make their beds and clean their rooms and wash the stairs and the floors
in the bathrooms
and the
and yeah.
bathrooms every morning before breakfast.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and then we had to grade those and then at nighttime that we had to make sure they were in bed by 10:30. But she said we often were doing late lights, which would go to 11:30. And we were just we often did we also had to supervise like meal chores like food put away, dish crew, breakfast prep, which would start at 5:30 in the morning. Like yeah, it was bonkers busy.
Yeah. So that's
So,
what's hard to fit in the prayer vigil.
Now,
Yeah, it
my
was actually
my
stressful.
recollection, so prayer vigil at the Community of Jesus when I was there was an hour, and
Mhm.
the teenagers were required to take the middle of the night shifts. So we could take 12 to 1, 1 to 2, 2 to 3, or 3 to 4.
Oh,
And then the other teenagers were, I think, part of the night watchman. So we might get to bed, I don't know, at 10, but then we would have to wake up in the middle of the night before the time that we had to be there, obviously, and then walk to the chapel. And then it was dark. The chapel was dark, and we sat up in where the choir was
Yeah.
with this bulletin board, and
Hmm.
we had to pray out loud for the things that were on the board and struggle so hard to stay awake in that dark chapel.
Oh,
And
wow.
then by the time the night watchman's ready to take you back, of course, you've been awake for like an hour and a half, but then you have to go and get back to sleep because you have to wake up at, oh dark 30 to get ready to, go to somebody's house and have breakfast and then make it to the bus and go to school. So
Wow.
that's, just the nighttime ritual that I remember. Carrie, what do you remember at the community?
Well, there were several years where we were doing 8 chant services. So we had to, the Lodge was at 6, so we had to get up, throw on some clothes, and get down to 45 minutes of Lodge, then come home and get the kids up, feed them breakfast, get them off to school, then go down to whatever your job was. And then at 9 o'clock, there would be terce, 15-minute service. Then you go back to work. And then at noon, there would be known, another 15-minute service, and then you'd go and have a half hour for lunch, and you go back to whatever job you were doing, whether it's in one of the offices or the AV department or the gardening or whatever. And then mid-afternoon, there was sext, another 15-minute service, and then you went back to work. And then at 5:30, there was vespers, which is a half-hour chant service, and then you'd go home and have your dinner. And then there was always something in the evenings. It was your evenings you did not have off. You didn't sit and read or watch TV. So in the early years, I would do the ironing or the laundry or prep food. And when I became a sister, I was assigned to the sewing room. So I'd go back and work on whatever projects we were doing in there. Um, and then at 9 or 9:15,
Mhm.
there was Compline, another 15-minute service, putting the church to bed. And then for several years, I was with a group of women who would do prime, which is midnight. And so, I'd be up to 10, 10:30, 11 o'clock, catch an hour of sleep, get up and go to prime, which was a 45-minute service. It was a long one, and then come home and catch a little bit more sleep and then have to get up for lodge the next morning. The brothers also did matins. Thank
Yeah.
goodness the rest of us weren't required to do matins because that was like at, I don't know, 2,
3
3,
a.m. Yeah.
3 a.m.
Um,
Yeah. And that was another long one also.
Do you
Yeah.
remember having to be in silence after Compline?
Yes.
yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's what I thought. But that didn't mean your day was over, and they certainly could break that silence to have a light session with you.
Or to give you instructions or, yeah, absolutely. But you couldn't talk. Yeah. People in
Brutal.
charge could give instructions, ream you out, but you had to stay silent.
So what are your
So, I
thoughts?
mean, sleep deprivation is typical for cults, and keeping you so busy that you have no time for self-reflection is also typical for cults. And
Hmm.
they applied both of those liberally.
What about food? So
Yeah.
I remember food also being something that was either forced or withheld. What are your recollections about food?
Hmm.
Oh, well, Judy was famous for loving to throw fasts at us. She loved the grape fast. Grapes were like a cure-all, could heal you of any disease, including cancer. So we got very creative with our grape fast. We had frozen grapes, grape juice, raisins, but they were miserable. I did not do well on the grape fast. I remember one Sunday, after weeks of being on just grapes, leaving church early, running home, opening the refrigerator door, sitting down on the floor, and dipping lettuce into ranch dressing, and it was the best thing I had ever tasted in my life.
Oh my God, that's so awful. That is so telling. God, I remember when I was very young, maybe seven-ish. I lived with a family and they were on the grape fast. I wrote about this in my book. Like they were putting grapes into the oven and like with salt and pepper on them and like
Yeah.
practically burning them because my, Uncle Ron liked it on the burnt side, like his food on the burnt side. And, the whole trailer smelled like it was about to burn up. And yeah, like I just remember thinking, I hope I never have to do that. But do you remember the cytotoxic testing? Did you do that
Oh,
down at the
oh,
community? Because we
we
did that and it was life changing. Like my mom is still following those results in her diet.
What was it called again?
Cytotoxic
cytotoxic.
testing. It was basically a kind of like testing for allergies, and I'm putting in quotes.
Yeah,
So each of us got this long list of things we were allergic to, and most people were allergic to almost everything. Like wheat flour, eggs, chicken, sugar, whatever. So then we all had to eat according to this really weird diet. So they were serving us, all the staff and staff kids, things like we would have for breakfast we would have rye bread with the best thing we could have was rye bread with some cheese melted on it. But the worst thing would be like swordfish for breakfast.
yeah,
Or, like we had really disgusting food, and all the rest of the students were eating normally, but we had to eat this very um restricted diet, and it lasted for months. What, like,
yeah.
I don't remember why we did that. Do you think just another
Oh, it was a
way of
fad of Judy's.
controlling?
Yeah, it was a fad of Judy's. She read about it and put the whole community on it, and I guess Grenville too. Between my family of five, between the five of us, we were allergic to almost everything: soy,
Yeah.
milk, wheat. You name it. One of my kids or my husband or I was allergic to it, and those were the days that we would send our kids to school, public school, with rice cakes with almond butter spread on it and celery sticks, and that was their lunch.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was, oh God, I can't imagine how awful that was for them.
Yeah, it was, and then don't get me started about the diets because people were randomly told to gain or lose weight. Like I guess that started from the get-go because I remember being 5 when they put me on a diet. But I saw staff members. I'll remember one staff member, she was publicly shamed for her weight and she was pulled out of the choir because she was too fat. And I remember being little and thinking she wasn't fat. And, like it was such a big shame to have an appetite. And so but then conversely, I talk about it all through my book. It basically started a lifetime of eating disorder, or disordered eating. But they would then, like one time, they made my mom gain 20 pounds, and I thought, what is going on? Like, I couldn't understand the logic. And then, of course, I decided, well, I must be such a hopeless glutton if my mom has to gain weight and I have to lose weight. Like, anyway, just, yeah. I guess I wasn't alone though. I'm hearing students, even boarding students were ashamed about their eating and their weight. And it was, Mary Haig was really very toxic that way. And I guess maybe were the mothers feeding that to her, do you think?
I honestly don't know because, of course, both mothers were very overweight. They were
I know.
obese. And I gained weight with every child that I bore, and I struggled to lose and could never lose. And I can remember once I became a sister, more than once going and pleading for help. Would, someone help me with my diet, somebody help me lose weight, and being brushed off like, you should be able to take care of that of yourself, just deny yourself. And I never got any help with losing weight. Um,
But
so
what
it
about the
wasn't
3D? Like, did they push the 3D diet on you?
not on us. For the community members, we could do 3D if we wanted to. They didn't push it on us. But they really sold it to the public. They were very much behind selling it to the public. Those were the days when Kay and Judy had that private jet and would fly out to Rochester to help run 3D.
Now 3D,
Wow.
if we can like
Yeah.
get decode, was
Yes,
diet, discipline, and discipleship, if I'm
Yeah.
Hmm.
yes.
remembering, and Carol Showalter
Yeah.
um, who was married to Bill Showalter, who was one of the clergy
Hmm.
Yes.
at the Community of Jesus, created that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
They put me on that when I was sent there at the age of 16. But I just, yeah, I don't know. Anyway,
So,
they, yeah, it's just, it was so weird how the mothers would shame people about their size. Like I was never fat, and I was made to feel like such a hopeless glutton, but they were fat, and I never really paid attention to the fact that they were fat. Like
And
I
they
just
got fatter as the years went by. I mean,
I
they were
But
large.
it was very much about appearance. Like your appearance, whether it was clothing or earrings or hairstyle, it was just all about appearance. And I remember as a student, Mary Haig taking a bunch of us girls who probably dressed like sluts, I don't know, taking us to Toronto on a shopping trip, and she would personally select. We'd go to some discount place that she knew about, and she would select clothing for us that was, and she was glamorous. She was like
Yeah.
she was glamorous, and I kind of worshiped her looks. Like I wanted to be as pretty as her and as fashionable, and she had this gold, she wore this cross, a diamond cross, and I went to my parents and I said, "Can you get me a diamond cross like Mrs. Haig's?" Like I just kind of anyway, so I just think because I got in trouble for not wearing earring. I didn't have the food thing, but we were controlled through appearance was really an important thing.
Did
Mhm.
they allow pierced earrings at Grenville?
I was allowed to have them when I got 13. It wasn't a big issue. Like I had to wait till I was 13, but
Because I can
uh
remember as a young mother in the community, I mean, I came from a hippie background, so I didn't wear makeup and I wasn't big into jewelry and stuff. But I liked earrings, and um, they told us no pierced earrings. So okay, and I had never pierced my ears.
Right.
And then I found out that some of the teenage girls, you know, Jill, Betsy, a bunch of them, had gotten their ears pierced, and I thought, oh, fun, cool. And so I wrote a note to Kay and Judy and said, "Can I get my ears pierced?" And they said, "Well, check with Betsy because she's in charge of the women, the community women now." So I wrote her and she says, "Yeah, we just got ours done. You can have yours done." So I went and got my ears pierced the next day. Kay and Judy had this big meeting with all the women that it was mutilation of the body and it was of the devil, and the two girls had been so wrong to do it, and yeah,
I remember
control.
thinking about that, wondering why you all wore uh clip-ons.
Yeah, yeah,
That's crazy town.
So
yeah,
you
Wow.
have to keep it in perspective. Like this whole, they're seeing the world through the Darmstadt, through a
yeah.
religious, like what do you call it? Not a monastery, but like
Convent.
vow
Convent.
religious. They're imposing it on people who are not in that call, who aren't, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, we were told that even though we were married, we were to live the same life as the sisters and brothers. That
Hmm.
poverty for us meant we had money, but it wasn't ours, it was God's. So we used the minimum for ourselves and gave the rest to God. Chastity meant sex was only for procreation, not for pleasure. And yeah, so they interpreted the vows for us, but we took the same vows and we were to live our lives as if we were brothers and sisters, religious brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
did the mothers dictate your sex life as a married couple?
Yes. Missionary position only.
Wow.
Um, don't even think about anything else.
Wow.
And if while you're in the intimate act, you have to police your mind to not be lustful, not enjoy it too much.
Wow.
I'm sorry.
And can I ask a question? Was that backed up by some biblical something? or like how did they, what was, like how did they become an authority on that? How, what did they say? Do you remember?
I don't know, they got revelation straight from God. I mean, my honest opinion is not so kind. They were closet lesbians and probably hated men. I mean,
Mhm.
there was a matriarchy, and the men got raked over the coals even more than the women did.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and then the men were constantly being told they weren't strong for the Lord and they didn't stand up and take their rightful places. But at the same time, they were never allowed to, and they were always being put on discipline and told how awful they were. So,
Interesting, because when I read you what's his name's book, Ewan's book, and they talked about that Judy had I mean purportedly, I don't know, had a relationship, a sexual relationship with a sister in Germany.
mhm,
It's interesting how the psychology would play out because the whole thing about kids not being with their parents came from Kay's own experience where Peter was taken away from her and went to live in Germany. And then she kind of made these rules for everybody else. Nobody else is allowed to have your kids. And I
right.
wonder if Judy's affair, if that was true, whether that would then come down to sexual rules. You know what I mean? Like if she
Mhm.
couldn't have an affair, a sexual thing. I don't know. It's just a thought.
Yeah. Well, everything we experience informs how we behave. So I'm sure there's some truth in that.
And Judy's backstory, I call poor little rich girl
Hmm.
because she was born into wealth, and her parents split, and her grandparents had her, and there was a huge court hearing that went on for years, custody battles, and um, you know,
Okay.
yeah. So
Hmm.
I mean, she did not have a good understanding of a healthy family dynamic
Mm.
either. I try not to
Yep.
excuse anything. It's just interesting to see the psychology of all of everything that came together, but just so interested to hear about the kind of schedule,
Yeah.
um, day in and day out. What what did living like that do to you while you were there? Um, After you left, being kind of groomed to be going busy all the time.
Mm.
In my first year out, I think it actually helped me in some way because I was so used to pushing myself that I was able to push myself to find a place to live, go to the food bank, ask for help, get to the career center, find a job, go to work. I mean, I was 63 when I left, so it would have been easy to slip into a passivity and tired. I was tired, but I was so used to pushing myself. So I think in a way it helped me. Um, but I had to retrain. I can remember one session with my therapist where I was complaining to him about how unmotivated I was in the evenings, that I was so tired, I didn't feel like doing anything after a full day of work, and what was wrong with me, that I couldn't get anything done, no projects, no housework. And he looked at me quizzically and said, most people after a day of work come home and relax, eat their dinner and watch TV. And I was like, what? You mean that's okay to do nothing in the evening?
Mhm.
Yeah, I get that. I to piggyback on that, like I same. Like I think we left with an incredibly, I don't know, excellent work ethic in terms of like we could handle a ton. Um and to me, I was like, okay, I'm gonna show the world that I'm ready to make up for lost time, and and also show them that I'm not gonna end up on the streets or go straight to hell. So I felt pressure to to prove myself, but also I learned later in retrospect, it was a case of racing through life. So I didn't slow down long enough to think about what I'd gone through or any of the trauma that was buried. So I know like it primed me so that I could never relax, never enjoy my surroundings, never slow down or even tolerate average performance. So like I luckily got into a career that, I went to university and got right into teaching in public system, and I couldn't imagine just being an average teacher. Like I felt so much pressure to be extraordinary, and um I couldn't even tolerate, like, if I got sick, which, all teachers get sick, I couldn't even bear to take a day off because first of all, it scared me to call in sick. I didn't want to even speak to the principal because I knew I was afraid I'd be told, well, we need you. What do you mean you're sick? That scared me, but I yeah, like I had luckily a house that I love with a front porch. I couldn't sit on that front porch and rock in the rocking chair for like almost 20 years. Like I just couldn't slow down and it would make my skin crawl. And my therapist kept saying, you should try meditation. I could not. Like, are you kidding me? Like that's like prayer. And also, it's slow and it's doing nothing. I couldn't try yoga. Yoga was too slow. Like, what are you talking about? Everything had to be like, go, go, go. But it caught up, like it does. And for those of us who are high achievers, it takes longer than the average bear, but you can't outrun it forever. And I finally burned out. Um, and now I need naps every day, and I've been like all the trauma caught up to the point where I got so exhausted I could barely cope, and everything fell apart. But it took for me almost 18 years to do that. So yeah, uh, you asked how it. Yeah, I think I've explained. Yeah, it was like I felt like I was on a fast-paced treadmill, and if I even took a breath, everything would fall apart. So yeah.
Hmm. I didn't experience that. I experienced just fear that like when I left. Are we talking about that? Is that
Yeah.
what we're talking about?
Or like how it affected you, like
Yeah,
after like being,
coming
our
out here.
schedules from prior or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how much of that was Grenville or how much of it's me, just my like maybe ADD or my I'm not sure, but I've experienced more feeling unworthy of anything positive. So if anything, so to relax, is like an indulgence. And so I did experience a lot of that, especially when I got married and my husband's a great napper and he likes to have fun. He likes to go and do things. And it's very hard for me to give myself permission to do that. It's like, it's just wrong. It feels like, but I know that my experience was mainly that I felt like I didn't deserve goodness or good things. And things didn't feel right to me unless they were hard.
Mm,
And so that drove me a lot, right? That drove me. And I always felt when I left and I started like making my way in the world, I just felt like I was always hanging on by just a thread of I don't know whether I can make this. Like I was so afraid of correction. I was so afraid of losing jobs and bosses. I had terrible problems with bosses.
hmm
I would just like have meltdowns all the time and fear of being corrected, fear of all of that. But as far as the drivenness, I am pretty driven. But I'm also learning just now, well, it's 24 years now for me gone. It's trying to, learn to relax and that it's
hmm
okay and that I do deserve it.
Yeah.
There's a
Yeah,
lot of not like feeling not deserving, right?
Yeah.
absolutely. One thing that Beth said made me wonder about something, and we can wrap up with this. Meditation
Mhm.
feels like prayer And I'm thinking back, and I remember Monday night meetings and Sunday church services and praying the offices. I do not remember reading my Bible. I don't remember individual prayer time. And I'm wondering if you all do.
Yeah.
I do.
I mean, I've read the Bible through at least 3 times. And I didn't do any individual prayer times in my houses, at home, but we had, especially as a sister, you would have individual prayer times where you would go in the chapel for a half hour and pray.
We had to read Bible. But it was mandatory though. It wasn't, we had to do quiet time in the morning, and we had Community of Jesus little books to write in and guided Bible readings. So I remember doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whether I would have done it by choice, I don't think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you were just expected to be praying all the time, like as you were busy,
Jesus help me, Jesus help me, Jesus help
or
me.
like, show me my sin. Because like you knew that at any given time you're going to be in a light session, and you're going to be there needed to be some sins on demand ready to go. So
Speaking
fully cooked.
speaking of prayer, thought blocking rituals, it's sort of around the transition time when Betty was getting thick with Kay and Judy, they came across the Jesus prayer. Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me, a sinner. We were taught that we needed to work on praying that constantly.
Yeah.
Constantly. It was to be going through our head constantly.
Yes, I was taught that when I was a 16-year-old down there
Yeah.
at the community, and I prayed it constantly. Yeah.
I did. I tried to for a long time. One of the
Yeah.
worst things you can do to yourself, but yeah, I did it.
Teaching
Yeah.
tapes on
Hmm?
repeat. Teaching tapes, the mother's
Same.
tapes.
Mhm.
Are you listening to those all the time?
Yep.
In the early years, constantly.
Yeah.
In the car, while you're ironing, doing housework. I mean, just constantly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We listened
Same.
to them as students too. Boarding students listened to them
Wow.
when we were doing work jobs and things.
Hmm.
Well, it
Same.
sounds like life was structured to be such that there was no time to think about what was happening to you, no time to dissect anything, any spare moment. Dogma was going into your head, and that's taken a toll. It's taken.
Mhm.
Yeah. They say, I keep listening to different cult scholars, and um, the whole notion of labor, forced labor, maybe not forced labor, but what's the word? Cults just basically specialize in keeping people working
Mm-hmm.
nonstop for free. What is that
Mm-hmm.
name? What is is
It
it
is for.
fraud or
It's
forced labor, I guess?
yeah, absolutely.
Um, and I think one function of that is so that you never have a chance to think about, like,
What's
to
happening?
reflect on your life and
Right.
how you really feel. Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Wow, I just have to say that you all are incredible people who've lived through so much and come out to take all of that horror and turn it into something good. And that is beautiful. And I very
Thank you.
much appreciate spending this time with you. And so next time we get together, I'd love to talk to you about your experiences leading up to and including leaving. And and then ultimately finish up with talking about your lives today. I know we've touched on those things as we've gone along, but um, I think today you three are doing some pretty amazing things. So I know that your stories are an inspiration to a lot of people, and I appreciate you taking the time to share them with us.
Thank you, Bonnie.
Yeah,
Thank you, Bonnie.
thank
And
you.
And your
you're included
experiences
in that,
too.
Bonnie.
You are. You're totally
Thank
included.
Thank you, guys. We'll talk again real soon.
thank
Okay.
you.
Okay.
Bye.